machine. This place reeks.
I know. Wait, you don't expect me to mop up, do you?
Come on, those guys are cake.
Not to mention, much sexier than you.
Well, your sexy little friends. They're coming for a dance.
They're still sexier than you are.
When talking about games, the term style can feel like a bit of an abstract. I spent the past 4 weeks or so trying to figure out how best to talk about it and explain the concept and write this damn video, so I think I have a bit of an idea on that. Suffice to say, there are a lot of things the term can refer to. In my experience, referencing a game's style is usually referring to its visual aesthetic. Sometimes it can mean gameplay or genre, but more often than not it refers to the pretty pixels moving around the screen. There are some titles that break that convention. A perfect example is Clover's final title, God Hand, a game with style more defined by its sassy self-awareness than its fairly bland visuals. Looking at God Hand compared to its contemporaries and games released alongside it, it's not surprising that it wasn't really a successful launch, but it's also not surprising that it's become a bit of a cult classic since its release. God Hand exudes style without using particularly unique visuals. Instead, it uses writing and gameplay to create the vibe that it's going for. These elements, combined with the ideals and goals that Clover had in mind when it was developing the project, are what led to God Hand being a cult classic despite its, failure of a launch. By the time they started working on God Hand, the team at Clover already had a few niche successes under their belt in the form of the Beautiful Joe series and the much beloved Okami. It's important to note that while their games had been relatively successful with critics, they hadn't been selling as well as Big Daddy Capcom, Clover's parent company, was wanting. Even the studio's first title, Beautiful Joe, was only considered a success because of how little it actually cost to create. The on-paper success of Beautiful Joe is what led to Capcom renaming Team Beautiful to Clover, establishing them as a child company with the aim of doing what Clover was best at, creating new and interesting IPs. It's unfortunate, but over time, tension grew between Capcom and Clover, with the leads at Clover growing more and more frustrated by Capcom's pressure and total unwillingness to take risks. Eventually, Clover began working on their last project, a beat-em-up by the name of God Hand. And it's important to note that this is all hearsay, but from the interviews and articles I've been reading, it seems like Clover were probably aware of their impending closure as they were heading into development on God Hand. With that in mind, it kind of makes this game seem like it's the result of Clover rallying together and saying, hey, okay, we're gonna go all in on this and experiment and just go with the flow and make the game we want to make. It seems like a final rallying cry before the studio was closed. But, like I said, there's no proof that that's exactly how things went down. It's hearsay. I'm just kind of reading between the lines here. The project was supervised by Shinji Mikami of Resident Evil fame and produced by Atsushi Inaba, who produced Devil May Cry, a game of similar tone to God Hand. And the idea for God Hand actually sprouted from a realization that the popular action games at the time weren't really messing with direct hand-to-hand combat, and they had, in their professional opinions, gotten a bit samey and a bit easy. Originally written and billed as a more serious title with little to no humor, Clover eventually decided to add some comedy based on playtester and audience reactions. As they added more and more comedy, they gradually made their way towards the au courant style and attitude that bleeds through in the final product. With their team together and the goal of creating an intense action game that focuses on hand-to-hand combat, all while harkening back to the studio's arcade roots, they began development. When it finally came time to release, God Hand not only didn't sell as well as Capcom wanted it to, but it also ended up with pretty average review scores. Only a few outlets actually gave it praise. One of the most notorious headlines for a God Hand review is easily IGN's take. Scored as an abysmal 3 out of 10, the headline Clover Studio delivers its oddest game yet, but unfortunately the jokes on us summarized not only the reviewer's feelings, but those of maybe a third or more of the player base on release. A lot of early reviews for God Hand panned its B-movie direction and its almost overacted voice work. Visuals were given a thumbs down, and the arcade throwback gameplay was condemned as simply button mashing with no thought required, a statement that's really just kinda wrong. These elements that were hated at release would end up being the foundation for God Hand's cult following. People would find nostalgia for arcade-style games in the title and really love the intentionally campy nature of its writing and direction. But at launch, it wasn't the case, and it wasn't enough. At the end of release week, God Hand seemed to be doing pretty well. 48,000 copies sold had it sitting pretty as the 5th best-selling new release. But that steam wasn't going to stay very long. By the end of 2006, it had only sold 60,000 copies, which, that was twice what Clover expected to sell, but it didn't get God Hand anywhere near the top 10 for the year. As is the nature of the games industry and business as a whole, Clover wasn't selling enough copies or making enough money, and God Hand was the last title they ever released. There's a chance that had God Hand been an immense critical success, it could have saved the studio. Clover could have gone and changed the game's formula to make it appeal to a wider audience. They could have made it easier or gone along with the popular themes at the time, but they didn't. Audiences expected something artful and touching like Okami, but when Clover released the off-kilter God Hand and it wasn't what people were hoping for or expecting, it hurt the studio's sales and further cemented their closure. While it didn't save the studio, God Hand would, over time, grow into a cult classic. It'd become a niche game that people would learn about and love, becoming the inspiration for a number of other titles, including, funnily enough, the Fist of the North Star games, which appear to be a mixture of traditional style fighters with some God Hand flair. The whole reason God Hand became a cult classic can be narrowed down to that one word I've been focusing on this entire time: style. Everything about God Hand, as self-conflicting as it seems, comes together to create a unique style in gameplay and tone. And to clarify, I say that God Hand is self-conflicting because when you look at it on paper and the writing and gameplay are presented separately, it really seems like the goofy writing would not mesh well with the intense, demanding gameplay. But as it turns out, the two mesh together pretty damn well and support each other and love each other and care for each other and tuck each other in at night. The gameplay is demanding in a way that harkens back to arcade levels of difficulty, while the writing and its delivery manage to be reminiscent of both classic B-movies and arcade cabinets. And I mean, of course you can find B-movie tier writing in cutscenes, but it's also found in off-kilter moments in the middle of the action. Honestly, if Clover had gone with their original humorless route for God Hand, it would not be nearly as fun to play. With how often you end up dying on your first playthrough, it would have become a slog if it had been serious. When it comes to cutscenes, it's pretty easy to tell how people connect God Hand to B-movies. The voice work is not great, and the writing does what it can to emphasize that. I think carefree is a good way to describe the cutscenes. A lot of jokes are made with the use of pretty colloquial language. Hell, some of the jokes are the use of colloquial language. And while the voice work in Viewtiful Joe was plenty campy, and even Devil May Cry 3, which was by a different studio, had a similar level of informality, the fact is that Okami was the last thing people remembered from Clover, and the audience has been split 50-50 on whether or not the campy nature of God Hand is intentional or just due to a low budget. My personal opinion is that it's likely a mixture of both. The studio had a low budget and decided to use that to their advantage, owning the lower tier of writing and turning it into a positive part of God Hand's style. The main characters themselves are all some kind of amplified stereotype. Jean, the player character, is just a smarmy asshole. The girl he's escorting puts on a facade of innocent unknowing, and the four big bads are a plotting vampire demon thing, an overtly sexual succubus, a run-of-the-mill rival of similar power, and a really fat dude with a shitty Spanish accent.
You hate eating human, chica. My breath is minty fresh.
Asshole!
Each of these villains has their own sort of level of concern for the plot, a different amount of seriousness towards the events taking place and their own goals. The fat guy and the succubus are kinda on the similar level of in it for themselves and just want to kick the main character's ass to say that they did. The rival takes his role in the plot very seriously, and he doesn't so much as crack a joke. Honestly, he seems like a bit of an edgelord, but don't tell him I said that. He's kinda It's kind of scary. Look at those sunglasses. Then there's the main baddie, who's plotting some kind of evil thing like you'd expect a suited bad guy to do. As cheesy as the writing is, I hesitate to call any of it bad. There are too many great lines and self-aware moments of hilarity for this writing to be bad. I think it's clever and incredibly smart, and I love it. When it comes to gameplay, enemy design and in-game dialogue play a decent role in setting the tone. Mainly, they work alongside the game's dynamic difficulty system, which I'll talk about in a second, to taunt or cower around the player, but their designs are just as important. Ranging from bandits and wrestlers all the way to a luchador gorilla and a pint-sized Power Rangers parody, the enemies serve to be basic punching bags while also informing you of the area that you're fighting in and maybe getting some laughs in. Town on fire? Bandits. Circus? Clowns and seductive ring mistresses. Boss fight on a giant mech? Yeah, find a robot doctor, whatever, why not, right? And that dynamic difficulty system that I mentioned, it's simple, but it adds worlds to the gameplay and opens up plenty of opportunities for God Hand's hilarity to shine through. If you play well by landing your hits and dodging enemy attacks, the game levels up, not the player. Keep that, this is important. An unseen audience cheers you on, and enemies start to do more damage and get smarter. They block more, they dodge more. Conversely, as you get your ass kicked on higher difficulties, the game levels down. The audience boos you, the enemies make fun of you. Overall, things get easier. Play really well, and the enemies actually cower and beg for their lives, but be careful because they're probably gonna hit you in the nuts if you get too close. And if you find yourself struggling on higher difficulties, you can actually use a super move with your God Hand to grovel and lower the game's level back down to 1, and yes, it makes fun of you for it. At every single chance they had, Clover found a way to inject sarcasm and self-awareness into God Hand. The style formed by the difficult gameplay melding with an almost casual writing is something that no other game has done since or as well. And I know that the Devil May Cry games have a similar kind of smarminess to them, so think about the differences between the two. And regardless of DMC being a more critical success, I don't think anyone else can do this style of game as well as Clover. Games that unabashedly stray from expected conventions of writing in order to experiment with tone like this are few and far between, and I think they should be taken as examples to devs, designers, and creatives. Nowadays, we have more and more indie games coming out with insane premises, and publishers like Adult Swim and Devolver seem to be doing everything they can to encourage that kind of game. I can't help but wonder what Clover's fate would have been if God Hand had been developed and released in a modern game climate. Would they have succeeded? Who knows? But it would definitely be interesting to see. Take this as a lesson to push your boundaries. Create something unique and stylish, whether or not it's gonna sell well. Because at the end of the day, we need to be creating for ourselves. And if other people enjoy it while we do, then hey, fuck yeah. Thanks for joining me for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, remember to do the YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, share it with your friends, make your dog watch it, I don't care. What do you think about God Hand's style? What do you think about games that try to do a similar thing? Let me know down in the comments. I'll see you next time. Bye!